Imagine a world locked in ice. Vast white plains stretch endlessly, broken only by jagged mountains and frozen rivers that glitter under a pale winter sun. The air is sharp and unforgiving, each breath cutting the lungs like shards of glass. The nights are even harsher, long, endless shadows creeping across the land, where temperatures plummet and silence reigns, broken only by the howl of a distant wolf or the groaning collapse of ice under its own weight. This was the Ice Age, a world both breathtaking and terrifying, where survival itself was the greatest test of human resilience. Tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors walked across this frozen stage. They were not yet farmers or city builders. They were hunters, gatherers, wanderers, and survivors. With no permanent homes, no fields of crops, and no written language, they faced winters so merciless that even the strongest could fall within days. Yet somehow, against all odds, they endured. These early humans carved out existence not with technology, but with ingenuity, instinct, and a will to live stronger than the storms around them. To step into their world is to understand fragility. Unlike the beasts they hunted, mammoths cloaked in thick fur, reindeer herds moving with the seasons, or the predators with fangs and claws, humans were born vulnerable. No sharp teeth to tear flesh, no thick coats to shield from the cold, no natural weapons to ward off danger. All they had was the ability to think, to cooperate, to innovate. Winter tested those abilities more than any other season. For when the ground froze and plants withered, when prey became scarce and water turned to solid ice, the cavemen faced a daily question. How do we keep the spark of life alive just one day more? In this frozen world, contrast defined every moment. The glow of fire against the suffocating darkness of night. The warmth of a fur hide against the bitter sting of frost. The sound of a child's laughter inside a cave against the deadly silence outside. Every victory, however small, was monumental. Every mistake could mean extinction. And extinction was not an abstract fear. It was a constant presence, claiming both animals and humans alike. Entire tribes could vanish after a failed hunt, or when storms raged longer than expected. Yet those who survived carried their knowledge forward, passing lessons of fire, food, and endurance from one generation to the next. This documentary is not only about what our ancestors faced, but how they triumphed. It is a story of creativity in the face of scarcity, of courage in the face of predators, and a hope in the face of a season that seemed determined to erase them. It is about the simple yet profound acts, storing meat under snow to preserve it, keeping embers alive through sleepless nights, building shelters from bones and hides, that separated survival from death. Picture a small band of humans moving through a blizzard, their bodies wrapped in the stitched hides of reindeer. Their faces are raw from the cold, their eyes watering from wind and ice. Yet they press forward because somewhere ahead lies the memory of a mammoth hunt and the promise of meat buried deep in snowbanks, where the cold itself has become their ally. For them, the snow was not just an enemy, but also a tool, a freezer gifted by nature. To understand such a strategy is to understand human adaptability, the ability to turn even the harshest elements into instruments of survival. But winter survival was not only physical. The mind itself was at war with despair. Darkness stretched for weeks, and in that darkness lurked the fear of predators, of hunger, of illness. Belief, ritual, and imagination became survival tools as well. When storms raged, humans painted symbols on cave walls, whispered to spirits, or buried their dead with care, hoping to keep the balance of life intact. These practices were more than superstition. They were ways to fight the crushing weight of hopelessness, to make sense of a world where death was always close. The story of cavemen in winter is therefore a story of contrasts. Fragility and strength, despair and hope, cold and warmth, silence and song. It is a narrative that asks us to step into their footprints, to feel the crunch of snow underfoot, the sting of frozen air, the ache of hunger in an empty stomach, and in the relief of fire's glow in a full belly after a successful hunt. These experiences shaped not only their survival, but the very foundations of humanity. For without mastering the cold, without learning to endure the cruelest season, our species might never have reached the present day. As we begin this journey into the Ice Age, remember that the people we call cavemen were not primitive in the way we often imagine. They were not bumbling caricatures with clubs. They were resourceful, thoughtful, and deeply attuned to their environment. Each decision they made carried weight. When to hunt, when to store, when to move, when to stay. Each action determined whether their children would see another sunrise, or whether their story would end buried under the snow. So let us walk with them. Let us sit by their fires, step into their shelters, and witness the fierce beauty of their struggle. Let us see the Ice Age through their eyes, not as distant observers, but as fellow humans who, at the core, share the same instinct for warmth, safety, and connection. This is not only their story of survival, it is ours too, written deep into the bones of humanity. For every time we light a fire, build a home, or prepare food for coming days, we echo the wisdom of those who once stood against the endless winter and found a way to endure. This is where our story begins. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, where a handful of determined humans face a season that could kill and, through their resilience, transform it into a crucible of survival. Winter in the Ice Age was not just a season. It was a force, a relentless adversary that shaped the destiny of every living creature. When the first snowflakes began to fall, they were not symbols of beauty or peace, but warnings of the struggle ahead. Each flake carried with it the promise of hunger, frost, and exhaustion. For the people of the Ice Age, winter was the one opponent that could never truly be defeated, only endured. The cold was constant and merciless. Day after day, temperatures sank well below freezing, turning streams into solid glass and covering the land with sheets of ice. Winds howled across the plains, sharp enough to cut through even the thickest fur hides. To step outside the shelter of a cave or a hut meant being battered by invisible blades, a trial that tested skin, bone, and spirit. Unlike predators, which could be fought or outwitted, winter could not be killed or scared away. It was an enemy that surrounded them, seeped into their shelters, and gnawed at their bodies without pause. The landscape itself turned hostile. Rivers, once flowing with fish and fresh water, froze into silence. Forests became bare skeletons, offering little in the way of fruit or leaves. Even the animals, lifelines for food, fur, and bone, disappeared, migrating southward or retreating into hibernation. What remained were creatures as desperate as humans, starving wolves, restless lions, and solitary bears, each equally determined to survive the lean months. For cavemen, every step outside became a gamble, with hunger on one side and predators on the other. Hunting grew infinitely harder in winter. In warmer seasons, prey herds were plentiful, grazing across meadows and valleys. But in the cold, those herds scattered, moved, or dwindled. Sometimes hunters followed tracks in the snow for days, only to find nothing at the end of the trail but emptiness. Energy was precious, and every failed hunt meant wasted strength that could not be easily regained. To kill a mammoth in such conditions was a victory of monumental scale. But failure often meant returning with nothing but frostbitten fingers and heavier despair. It was not only the body that winter attacked. It was the mind. Long nights dragged on endlessly, with darkness stretching for 16, even 18 hours. In those hours, families huddled in silence, listening to the wind scream outside their shelters. The mind played cruel tricks in such conditions. A snapping branch could become a lurking predator. The moan of shifting ice could sound like spirits in the dark. Fear and anxiety were constant companions, gnawing at morale as much as the cold gnawed at flesh. Food became both treasure and torment. With each passing week, the question hung heavy in the air. Would the stores last? Meat buried under snow was checked again and again, each portion carefully rationed. Each decision about what to eat weighed against the uncertainty of tomorrow. Hunger sharpened tempers, weakened muscles, and slowed thought. For the youngest and oldest members of the tribe, it was often the most dangerous time. Their bodies could not fight as hard against the cold, and each winter, some were lost, leaving painful absences in the tight-knit groups. And yet, even in its cruelty, winter carried lessons. The cold taught humans to adapt, to push beyond instinct into creativity. Fire was not enough on its own. They learned to stitch hides together into layered clothing, to insulate shelters with furs and bones, to carve new tools suited for icy landscapes. Winter forced them to innovate or perish. In this way, the enemy became an unintentional teacher, sharpening their intelligence as much as their endurance. The harshness of winter also forged a stronger sense of unity. No single person could hope to withstand it alone. The long nights demanded company, the sharing of warmth, the passing of stories, and the division of duties. One person tended the fire, while another checked food stores. Hunters relied on each other's strength and trust, knowing that a misstep could doom them all. In the face of winter's assault, bonds of loyalty and cooperation grew into unbreakable lifelines. Still, the price of failure was steep. Archaeological evidence shows entire groups wiped out by the season's grip, their remains frozen in caves or buried in snowdrifts. The winter of the Ice Age was indiscriminate. It consumed animals and humans alike. Survival was not guaranteed by strength alone, but by strategy, timing, and sometimes sheer chance. To live through a single Ice Age winter was a triumph. To live through many was a miracle. The contrast of life and death was always present. A roaring fire inside a cave could mean laughter, warmth, and the smell of cooking meat. Just a few steps beyond the cave's mouth, however, lay the shrieking winds, icy ground, and the shadow of predators stalking for their own chance at survival. Children might fall asleep to the comforting crackle of flames, while their parents remained awake, listening for the distant cries of wolves echoing through the night. Each winter created such dualities: safety and peril, warmth and cold, survival and extinction. This was the battlefield where our ancestors lived, and winter was the unyielding adversary they faced year after year. Unlike the mammoth or the lion, it never tired, never weakened, never relented. Its grip was total, and its only mercy was the eventual return of spring. But those who endured, who buried their food in snow, who learned to make fire last, who huddled together and believed in tomorrow, they were the ones who carried humanity forward. Without them, winter would have been the end. Instead, it became the crucible in which human resilience was forged. And so, when we think of the Ice Age, we must not imagine only frozen landscapes and majestic animals. We must imagine winter as it truly was, a living enemy, invisible yet ever-present, pressing against every breath and every choice. For the cavemen, survival was not just about enduring hunger or cold. It was about enduring winter itself, the harshest test nature ever placed before them. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, survival was not simply about finding warmth or shelter. It was about the hunt. Food was scarce, and in winter, the difference between a successful kill and an empty-handed return could mean the life or death of an entire tribe. Hunting was not a sport. It was not a pastime. It was a brutal necessity, and in the snowbound plains of prehistory, it pushed humans to the very edge of endurance. Imagine a vast white expanse stretching for miles, a herd of mammoths moving slowly across it, their massive bodies cloaked in thick fur, their tusks curling like ivory sides. To the cavemen, such a herd represented both salvation and danger. A single mammoth could feed dozens of people for weeks, providing not only meat but fat, hides, and bones. Yet to bring one down required courage, skill, and a willingness to risk everything. One wrong move, One miscalculation, and the hunters could be crushed beneath stamping feet or gored by tusks longer than their own bodies. The hunt began long before the spears were thrown. It began with tracking. In winter, this meant scanning the snowy ground for faint depressions, for scat, for signs of grazing. Hunters moved silently, sometimes for days, following trails through blizzards, across frozen rivers, and into hostile territory. Their eyes were trained to read the smallest details. The freshness of a print, the depth of a hoof mark, the broken twigs where a beast had passed. Each sign was a clue, each clue a whisper of hope that prey still lingered in the frozen land. When a herd was found, the strategy began. Cavemen did not attack blindly. They were not reckless fools rushing into battle with giants. They studied the herd, watched its movements, and searched for weakness. Often it was the young, the injured, or the old who were targeted. To strike at the strongest mammoth was suicide. But to isolate the vulnerable was a chance at victory. Communication was silent and precise. Gestures, glances, signals passed between hunters who knew that a single noise could scatter the herd and end the opportunity. The chase was as much about stamina as it was about strength. Humans were not the fastest hunters, but they had an advantage no mammoth or reindeer possessed. Endurance. Where animals tired, humans pressed on. Where hooves stumbled in snow, human legs kept moving, step after painful step. Persistence hunting, driving animals until they weakened, was one of humanity's oldest weapons. In the depths of winter, this strategy became a cruel test. The hunters' lungs burned with icy air, their legs ached, and their bellies growled with hunger. But they ran, they pursued, they endured, because the reward was worth the suffering. And then came the moment of attack. Spears, tipped with sharpened flint or hardened by fire, were raised. Hunters spread out, surrounding their prey, cutting off its escape routes. They worked together like wolves, driving the animal into confusion, striking from different angles, forcing it into panic. A mammoth's roar echoed across the plain, a sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. The beast charged, and in that instant, survival balanced on a knife's edge. Spears flew, stabbing into thick hide, and hunters dodged tusks that could tear them apart. It was chaos, violence, and desperation, a scene as terrifying as it was essential. Success was never guaranteed. Many hunts ended in tragedy. A single misstep could cost a life, and lives were not easily spared in the Ice Age. Broken bones, deep wounds, frostbite, these were the risks every hunter carried. But when the mammoth finally fell, when its massive body crashed into the snow, the victory was not only physical, it was spiritual. It was a triumph over hunger, over fear, over the winter itself. The hunters raised their voices in cries that echoed to the cold air, a celebration of life snatched from the jaws of death. The rewards of such a hunt were immense. The meat was carved with precision, nothing wasted. Fat was treasured, for in the winter, fat meant warmth, calories, and survival. Bones became tools, needles, and weapons. Hides were stretched into clothing and shelter. Even the tusks were shaped into ornaments or symbolic objects. To kill a mammoth was not simply to eat. It was to secure life for weeks, even months, to transform danger into sustenance. But hunting was not always about mammoths. Reindeer, bison, wild horses, and smaller animals also played vital roles. Traps were set, pitfalls dug, and spears ready for ambushes. Fish, when rivers were not completely frozen, were caught with sharpened sticks or nets woven from plant fibers. Rabbits and birds provided small but precious meals. In the depths of winter, no source of food was ignored, no opportunity wasted. Every bite counted. The hunt carried another weight, the psychological strain. Each time hunters left their shelters, their families watched them vanish into the snow with no guarantee of return. Wives, children, elders, All waited, anxious, listening for the distant call that signaled success or failure. Days of silence could mean disaster. The returning sound of voices and footsteps meant relief, joy, and survival. Each successful hunt lifted spirits, reminded the tribe of its strength, and gave hope against the oppressive cold. Winter hunting also defined human cooperation. It was never a solitary effort. Men and women alike played roles, whether in tracking, preparing weapons, or processing meat. The hunt bound the tribe together, forging trust and reliance. In the face of a common enemy, hunger, every individual's skill mattered. This unity was the invisible weapon that allowed fragile humans to bring down beasts 10 times their size. Yet the edge was always there. To hunt in the Ice Age was to live constantly at the brink, to dance with danger in a frozen world where one mistake could erase an entire bloodline. It was a gamble where the stakes were existence itself. And it was in this gamble, again and again, that humanity proved its resilience. When we look back at these hunts today, preserved in cave paintings and scattered bones, we see not only the raw violence, but the quiet brilliance. Strategy, endurance, cooperation. These were the true weapons of the cavemen. They were not reckless savages. They were tacticians, innovators, and survivors. And every time they faced the snow, the wind, and the shadow of giants, they reminded the world of the truth that still defines us. That humans, fragile though we may seem, can achieve the impossible when survival demands it. In the end, hunting on the edge was not only about filling stomachs. It was about holding on to life in a world that constantly threatened to take it away. It was about proving that even against mammoths, lions, and the bitter grip of winter, humanity could endure. And through every hunt, every risk, and every victory, the story of our survival was written one chase across the snow at a time. In a world without refrigerators, without salt, without sealed containers or smokehouses, one of the greatest challenges of survival was not just finding food, it was keeping it. A successful hunt brought abundance, but abundance was both a blessing and a problem. Fresh meat spoiled quickly, even in the cold, without a way to preserve it. The victory of the hunt could rot into waste. In the depths of the Ice Age, when every bite was precious, waste meant death. But the cavemen had discovered something profound. The snow and ice that surrounded them were not only obstacles, they were allies. They had found nature's freezer. Imagine a mammoth lying on its side, finally defeated after days of tracking and hours of attack. The hunters gather, carving strips of meat, slicing through thick fat, pulling marrow from bones. The sheer quantity is overwhelming. Even with dozens of mouths to feed, much of the carcass cannot be eaten at once. To leave exposed meant inviting scavengers, wolves, lions, and hyenas, as well as the slow creep of decay. But in the frozen earth, humans discovered a solution. They dug into the snow, carving pits, covering meat with layers of ice and stone, then sealing it back beneath the drifting powder. The same cold that threatened their lives became the very tool that prolonged them. The principle was simple, yet revolutionary. Snow and ice created a constant, stable cold, slowing the natural decay of flesh. The freezing ground acted as insulation, protecting meat from air, bacteria, and predators. A buried cache could last not just days but weeks, even months, turning one successful hunt into a lifeline that stretched across a long winter. It was an ancient form of refrigeration, one that required no invention, only observation and adaptation. Archaeological evidence supports this practice. In frozen regions of Siberia, Alaska, and Europe, researchers have uncovered pits, bones, and remnants suggesting that Ice Age humans deliberately stored food underground. Even today, some Arctic and subarctic cultures, the Inuit, the Sami, and others, still practice versions of this method, burying meat or fish in permafrost to preserve it through the harshest seasons. These echoes across time reveal a truth. The snow was more than a killer. It was a silent partner in survival. Yet snow storage was not without risks. Predators could smell the buried meat. Wolves and bears prowled the edges of human camps, drawn by the scent of blood and fat. To guard their caches, cavemen had to be clever. Sometimes they chose remote hidden spots, far from camp, where animals were less likely to stumble upon the prize. At other times, they built stone barriers, piled rocks, or used fire-hardened stakes to protect their stores. Some groups may have rotated storage sites, never putting all their meat in one place, spreading out their risk as nature forced them into an early form of resource management. For the tribe, snow storage was more than a technique. It was reassurance. To know that food lay waiting beneath the drifts was to know that hunger could be held at bay. It gave hunters courage, knowing that even if tomorrow's hunt failed, there was something to return to. It gave families hope, the promise that the children could eat, that the fire could be fed, that the tribe could last another week. In the psychological war against winter, buried caches were fortresses of security. There's a powerful symbolism here. 2. To bury meat in snow was to bury life in death's disguise. The cold, which could so easily extinguish the fragile flame of a human body, became the very thing that kept nourishment safe. It was a paradox, a contrast. The killer turned protector, the enemy turned ally. The same snow that froze fingers and toes preserved marrow and muscle, teaching humans one of their most important lessons, that survival often meant bending the harshest elements into tools. The process of retrieving stored food was a ritual of its own. Imagine the hunters walking out into the white silence, the wind sharp, their feet crunching across drifts. They reach the hidden cache, scrape away the crusted snow, and pry up the frozen stones. Beneath lies the prize, slabs of meat, cold and preserved, still good to eat. The tribe carries it back to camp, their spirits lifted by the return of food that seemed conjured from the snow itself. When it sizzled over the fire, the air filling with the smell of roasting flesh, it was not just a meal. It was proof that they had outwitted nature, that their foresight had triumphed over hunger. Snow storage also shaped the rhythm of life. Hunts were not constant. They were costly in energy and risk. But with storage, the pressure eased. Instead of hunting every day, the tribe could plan, pace themselves, and conserve energy. Stored food meant time. Time to mend clothing, repair tools, teach children, or simply rest. It meant stability in a world where instability reigned. In this way, the act of burying meat did not just save calories. It saved lives in countless hidden ways. For children growing up in the Ice Age, the buried caches must have seemed like magic. To see food vanish beneath the snow and reappear weeks later was to witness the mysteries of the world. These early experiences may have fueled myths, rituals, and traditions. Perhaps they saw the earth as a womb, protecting and giving back life. Perhaps they imagined spirits guarding their food beneath the frozen ground. Whatever they believed, the practice left its mark not just on their bellies, but on their imagination. Even today, we can sense the ingenuity behind this act. Modern freezers and refrigerators are so common, we forget the brilliance of the idea itself, to take the natural cold and make it serve us. The cavemen who first buried their kills in snow were laying the foundation for every future step in food preservation, from salted meats to ice boxes to electric refrigeration. It was not only a survival technique, it was a spark of human mastery over time itself, the power to stretch abundance into endurance. But it was always a fragile balance. A storm could bury the cache too deeply, making it hard to find. Thaws could spoil the meat, unexpected warmth-bringing rot. Predators could discover the scent, undoing weeks of labor. This uncertainty only deepened the tension of winter survival. Even with food stored, the threat of hunger never truly vanished. Each cache was a gamble, a hope buried in ice. And yet, again and again, the gamble paid off. Again and again, the snow gave back what it had hidden. It was this quiet alliance, this subtle use of nature against itself, that allowed humans to endure winters that should have destroyed them. To bury meat under snow was more than survival. It was adaptation, foresight, and the first step toward conquering the seasons. So when we imagine cavemen crouching over a snowbank, lowering cuts of meat into its icy depths, we are not simply looking at primitive scavengers. We are witnessing a moment of brilliance, a moment when humans learned that the very thing that threatened to kill them could be reshaped into a tool for life. It is a moment that echoes in every refrigerator, every freezer, every act of preserving food today. The snow was once the enemy, but for those who learned its secret, it became the guardian of survival. For the cavemen, nothing in their world was as mysterious, as powerful, and as essential as fire. It was not merely a tool. It was a difference between life and death. In the grip of an ice age winter, fire was more than warmth. It was light in the endless darkness, protection against prowling beasts, and a symbol of safety and home. Without it, survival was almost impossible. With it, humans gained a fragile foothold against the cold and the chaos of nature. Imagine the endless snowfields stretching across Europe and Asia, the wind howling through valleys, the sun setting far too early, the temperature drops, the cold seeping into bones, turning breath to ice. In this brutal world, a campfire becomes a beacon, a tiny island of warmth surrounded by a sea of frost. Families huddle around it, the flames painting their faces orange and gold, shadows dancing on cave walls. The fire cracks and spits, and every spark feels like defiance. Proof that humans were no longer helpless prey, but beings who could bend the elements themselves. But fire was never guaranteed. Striking sparks from flint was no easy task, especially with frozen fingers and damp wood. Even those who had mastered the technique lived with constant fear. What if the flames died? In an age before matches, before lighters, before fire starters, losing the campfire could mean disaster. Without its heat, water turned to ice, food refused to cook, bodies froze in the night. Entire groups may have perished because their flames were extinguished by storms or carelessness. Fire was fragile, and with it, so were they. Anthropologists suggest that early humans treated fire almost like a living member of the group. It had to be fed with wood, kept alive through the night, guarded from rain and snow. The responsibility often fell to women, children, or elders while hunters were away, to keep the flames burning so that the tribe would have warmth upon their return. In this sense, fire became more than a tool. It became a trust, a duty, a sacred presence at the heart of human life. The practical benefits of fire were profound. It turned raw, bloody flesh into tender, digestible meals. Cooked food was easier to chew, easier to digest, and safer from disease. Over generations, this may have shaped human biology itself, allowing brains to grow larger while teeth and jaws grew smaller. Fire extended the day, pushing back the darkness, giving humans time to talk, plan, and imagine. Around the fire, myths were born, stories told, bonds forged. It was not only physical survival that fire gave. It gave culture, memory, and identity. Yet in winter, fire's role grew even more critical. At night, when icy winds tore through caves and shelters, the flames were shields against frostbite and hypothermia. Hunters returning from the snow could strip off damp furs, stretch their numb fingers toward the fire, and feel life returning. Fire dried clothing, hardened spear tips, and warded off predators whose eyes glowed at the edge of the light. Wolves, lions, even mammoths hesitated to approach a blaze. Fire was humanity's first weapon that no other creature dared to master. Still, fire had its dangers. It was beautiful but wild, destructive if mishandled. A stray spark could burn precious furs, destroy shelters, or scar the skin. Early humans must have walked a delicate line, learning to control something that seemed uncontrollable. They carried embers and hollow bones, bark, or bundles of dry grass, transporting the essence of flame from one site to another. To lose those embers was to risk starvation and death, so they guarded them carefully. Every move, every migration was shaped by the question, could they carry the fire? For children, fire must have seemed like magic. It moved, it roared, it devoured, and yet it gave life. They learned quickly to respect it. To touch too closely was pain, to neglect it was danger. But as they grew, they also learned its secrets. The careful spark between stones, the gathering of dry twigs and moss, the way to shield a flame from wind with cupped hands. These were lessons passed not in words, but in demonstration, shaping every new generation into guardians of the flame. In the winter nights, fire was also a stage for the imagination. When hunting was done, when bellies were filled, when the darkness pressed too heavily against the camp, humans turned inward toward story. Around the flickering flames, they spoke of spirits, of ancestors, of dreams. Shadows on the cave walls danced like ghosts, sparking myths that would echo for millennia. The first religions, the first rituals, may have been born in the glow of firelight. Here, humans were no longer just surviving. They were becoming something greater. Fire also gave confidence to venture farther north, into colder, harsher lands. Without fire, migration into Ice Age Europe would have been unthinkable. But with it, humans could endure nights that froze the rivers and killed the trees. Fire unlocked new territories, expanding the human world, giving them the courage to face what no other animal could. In this sense, fire was not only survival. It was expansion, conquest, the opening of a new chapter in human history. Yet, we must not forget how precarious it always was. For all its power, fire could be lost in a single storm. A sudden downpour, a careless mistake, a shortage of wood, and the life-giving flames were gone. Imagine the panic. The tribe shivering in darkness, scrambling to strike flint, praying for sparks. The longer it took, the colder they became, their movements slower, their breath weaker. Fire was not a luxury. It was a line drawn thinly across the snow, and to lose it was to step into extinction. When we look back at those Ice Age winters, we often think of the weapons, the hunts, the struggles against beasts. But in truth, perhaps the greatest battle was fought every night around the fire. It was here that humans tested their endurance, their foresight, their unity. Fire demanded constant care, and in giving it, humans learned responsibility, cooperation, and patience. It shaped not only their survival, but their very character. Even today, the fire remains with us, not just in the hearths and stoves that warm our homes, but in the very idea of light against darkness, warmth against cold, life against death. We carry it forward in every spark of electricity, every glowing screen, every flame that cooks our meals. The cavemen's fire still burns in us, a reminder of the thin line they walked, and the brilliance that allowed them to cross it. So when we picture those families huddled in the Ice Age night, their faces lit by a small, flickering fire, we should not see them as fragile or primitive. We should see them as triumphant, as the first beings to wrestle with one of nature's most dangerous forces and make it serve them. Fire was more than survival. It was the dawn of humanity itself, a fragile flame that turned the freezing darkness into a place where humans could endure, dream, and eventually dominate. In the Ice Age, the cold did not only come from the falling snow or the frozen rivers. It came from the wind, sharp, invisible, merciless. The wind could strip heat from a body faster than any snowstorm, turning skin numb and lungs raw. To face winter without protection was to invite death. And so, for the cavemen, the battle for survival was also a battle for shelter, a struggle to build walls strong enough to hold back the frozen breath of nature. The first and most ancient of shelters was the cave. These dark hollows in the earth became fortresses against the elements. Inside, the rock kept out the wind and offered a stable temperature, warmer than the blizzards that raged outside. In some caves, soot stains still remain on ceilings where fires once burned, evidence of people huddling in the glow, pressing closer together for warmth. Yet caves were not always safe. They were homes to bears, lions, and other predators. To claim a cave meant driving out its original owner, or defending it fiercely. The safety of stone came with constant vigilance. But not every tribe had caves at their disposal. The Ice Age world was vast, and families moved with the herds, often across open plains where no caves existed. Here, humans had to create shelter with their own hands, carving safety out of a hostile environment. They built with what they had: bones, hides, branches, snow. Archaeologists have uncovered sites where mammoth bones formed the framework of huts, covered with layers of animal skins to trap heat inside. The sheer size of these constructions tells us something about human determination. To carry and arrange bones weighing hundreds of pounds in freezing weather was not just survival, it was defiance. Snow itself became both obstacle and ally. To walk through it was exhausting, to sleep on it deadly, but to dig into it could mean safety. Some groups carved pits into drifts, lining them with branches and hides, then covering the top to block the wind. These snow shelters, much like the igloos of later Arctic peoples, became oases of warmth in a desert of ice. What seemed hostile became a resource. Proof again that adaptation was humanity's sharpest tool. The interior of these shelters was more than a roof. It was a world of its own. Here, fire burned at the center, its smoke escaping through small openings. Furs were spread across the ground, insulating against the frozen soil. Spears leaned against walls. Food was stored in pits or snow mounds, and children played in the faint glow of flames. For outsiders, the Ice Age world was brutal and vast. But for those inside the shelter, it shrank to the radius of firelight, the sound of crackling wood, the murmur of voices. It was not only protection, it was home. Yet the struggle to maintain a shelter was never-ending. The cold seeped through cracks. Storms tore coverings, snow collapsed roofs. Repairs were constant, and each family learned to be both builder and watchman. A small mistake, a loosening in the hides, a fire left unattended, could cost lives. In this way, shelter was not a passive defense. It was an active battle, waged daily, against the tireless assault of the frozen wind. Shelter also defined identity and belonging. To step inside a warm hut or cave was to feel part of something greater than oneself. Here, one belonged to a group, a circle of protection, a shared life. For strangers or outsiders, entering another's shelter was a sacred act, requiring trust and hospitality. The walls that kept out the cold also drew lines of kinship, dividing those who shared the warmth from those who remained outside. But the shelters of the Ice Age were not only for humans. Dogs, descended from wolves, may have shared these spaces, offering warm companionship and warning of danger. Their presence made the shelter more than a physical construction. It was a living ecosystem, a union of species bound together by survival. The bond between humans and animals, perhaps one of the oldest alliances in history, was strengthened in these dark, fire-lit enclosures. As with fire, shelter carried symbolic meaning. It was more than stone, hide, and bone. It was a symbol of human resilience, of bending the environment to human will. Each structure stood as a declaration. Here we resist the cold. Here we endure. And in those shelters, the first whispers of architecture were born, the first experiments in shaping space. What began as protection against winter would, in time, become villages, cities, civilizations. The seed of all human homes lay in those Ice Age huts, pressed against the wind. Still, the contrast was always stark. Inside, warmth, family, survival. Outside, the endless white, the howling void, the ever-hungry predators. Crossing that threshold meant stepping from life into danger, from safety into struggle. The walls were thin, the materials fragile, but they marked a boundary as real as any fortress. Behind them, humans were more than animals. They were a people, a community, a species on the rise. And when the storms finally cleared, when spring sunlight returned and snow melted from the hills, the shelters were abandoned or rebuilt. Some collapsed and vanished, leaving only faint traces for archaeologists to find. But for those who once lived inside them, they were the heart of existence, the fragile but vital shield that turned an impossible winter into a survivable one. So, when we think of the Ice Age, let's not only picture the mammoth hunts, the roaring fires, or the endless migrations. Let us also picture the shelters, the caves echoing with laughter, the huts of bone and hide glowing with firelight, the snow pits carved into drifts. In these fragile constructions lay humanity's greatest defense against nature's cruelty. For it was within those walls, however thin, that people endured the long, frozen nights and dreamed of the spring that would come. In the Ice Age, the body alone was not enough to face the cold. Skin, hair, and instinct had carried humanity this far. But against the frozen winds and plunging temperatures of winter, nature offered little protection. Unlike bears or wolves, humans were fragile, exposed, vulnerable. To survive, they had to craft a second skin, clothing that transformed weakness into resilience. Dressing for survival was not fashion. It was armor, as vital as fire or shelter. The earliest garments were simple yet ingenious. Animal hides, stripped from freshly hunted prey, were wrapped around the body, for facing outward to catch snow and wind. These hides were not wasted trophies. They were lifelines. A mammoth provided not only meat and bone, but vast sheets of skin that could clothe an entire family. Deer and bison hides, softer and more pliable, made for cloaks, leggings, and boots. Each kill was measured not only in calories, but in protection. For without clothing, even the strongest hunter could not last long in the open. But clothing was not merely draped, it was crafted. Cavemen stitched hides together, using sinew for thread and bone needles sharper than thorns. Archaeological finds show that these needles were surprisingly refined, proof of delicate hands and patient skill. This was not the rough work of chance, but deliberate engineering. Each seam sealed warmth inside. Each stitch kept the wind at bay. The act of sewing became as important as the act of hunting, for one without the other was useless. A hunter without proper furs was a body exposed to death. Layering was key. The cold demanded more than one garment. Inner layers of softer hides clung close to the skin, while heavier furs were draped over shoulders and backs. Boots, stuffed with grass or moss, insulated the feet, turning fragile flesh into sturdy tools. Hoods and caps made from fox or wolf pelts covered heads and ears, where heat was most easily lost. Even hands were protected with fur wrappings, leaving just enough dexterity for spears and tools. Piece by piece, the human form disappeared under layers, transformed into a moving fortress against the cold. These clothes were not only practical but symbolic. To wear the fur of a predator was to take its strength, to cloak oneself in its spirit. The pelt of a wolf might lend courage, the hide of a bear resilience, the skin of a deer swiftness. In this way, clothing blurred the line between survival and belief. It was not just protection but identity, marking hunters as part of a cycle where animal and human lives intertwined. Death gave way to life, and life honored death by wearing its gift. Winter demanded constant maintenance of these garments. Hides grew stiff when frozen, cracking if not softened with fat or oil. Women, and sometimes men, worked tirelessly to scrape tan and preserve skins beating them until they were supple. Smoked hides resisted moisture, lasting longer in the snow. Nothing was wasted. Bones became needles, sinew became thread, fat became water repellent. The very act of preparing clothing was a ritual of survival, a reminder that nature provided nothing freely. Every scrap had to be earned, preserved, transformed. The variety of clothing also spoke to adaptation across regions. In some areas, where reindeer were abundant, their hides provided light, yet warm clothing suited for mobility. In harsher regions, where mammoth or bison were hunted, garments were thicker, heavier, designed for endurance rather than speed. Some groups even decorated their clothing with beads or carved ivory, suggesting that even in the face of relentless cold, humans sought beauty and meaning. Clothing became both shield and canvas, proof that survival did not extinguish creativity, but instead sharpened it. But the most striking power of clothing lay in the contrast it created. Outside, the cold was merciless, gnawing at flesh, stiffening fingers, stealing breath. Inside the layers of fur and hide, there was warmth, safety, a pocket of life in a frozen world. To wrap oneself in these garments was to carry a piece of shelter. Wherever one walked, a mobile defense against extinction. Hunters could venture farther. Families could migrate longer. Children could endure nights that otherwise would have claimed them. Clothing turned exposure into endurance. Still, clothing alone was not invincible. Wet hides froze solid, stiff as stone, forcing wearers to thaw them by fire before use. Boots wore thin from constant trekking, exposing feet to frostbite. Garments soaked in blood from hunting or battle needed swift cleaning, lest they stiffen and rot. Each day demanded care. Each night demanded preparation for the next. Clothing was not static. It was alive with the work of those who made and maintained it. Psychologically, clothing offered more than warmth. It gave confidence. A hunter wrapped in wool furs could walk into the blizzard believing he could endure. A child bundled in layers could sleep without fear of freezing. Clothing created a sense of mastery over nature, a fragile but vital illusion. In reality, the cold was still deadly, but wrapped in hides and furs. Humans felt they had wrestled some control back from the chaos of winter. Clothing also reshaped human relationships. The work of preparing, sewing, and repairing fell often to women, whose skill ensured the survival of all. In this way, survival was a shared effort, where the spear and the needle were equally vital weapons against extinction. The hunt brought raw material, but the hands at home turned it into salvation. In winter, when every mistake cost dearly, the harmony of these roles meant the difference between life and death. When archaeologists uncover Ice Age sites, they often find needles, beads, and scraps of fur, fragile remnants of garments that once shielded families. Each artifact tells a story of a people who understood their vulnerability and overcame it. They remind us that clothing was not optional, not luxury, but the very skin of survival. To strip it away would be to strip away life itself. And so, in the frozen plains of the Ice Age, clothing became humanity's greatest invention after fire. It was not only practical protection, but cultural identity, spiritual armor, and psychological strength. Against the endless snow and the cutting winds, it transformed fragile bodies into beings capable of enduring what no naked flesh could. In the battle of man against winter, clothing was a silent ally, wrapping humans in the strength of the animals they hunted, in the patience of those who stitched, and in the resilience of a species that refused to surrender. With every seam and stitch, humanity declared, "We will not be broken. We will not freeze. We will endure." Hunting in the Ice Age was never a daily guarantee. A tribe could spend days tracking prey across endless plains, exhausting themselves in the freezing cold, only to return empty-handed. Then, suddenly, fortune would turn, a mammoth brought down or a bison fell by spears. The kill would bring abundance, more meat, than a single group could eat in one night. But abundance carried its own problem: how to keep the harvest from rotting when tomorrow's hunger was certain to return. Here lay the brilliance of Ice Age survival. The cavemen discovered that the very enemy that threatened them, the cold, could also be their greatest ally. Snow and ice were not just obstacles, they were tools, nature's own larder. By burying meat deep in frozen ground or covering it with packed snow, prehistoric humans created natural refrigerators. In this way, the bounty of one successful hunt could be stretched across weeks, even months, turning feasts into survival. Imagine the scene. A fresh mammoth lies on the snow, steaming in the frigid air. The hunters, weary but triumphant, begin the work of butchering. Knives of flint and obsidian slice through thick hide, cutting slabs of meat. The task is grueling. A mammoth could weigh several tons, its flesh enough to feed dozens of people. Fires crackle nearby, roasting portions for immediate consumption, while the bulk of the meat is set aside. Some is dried or smoked. But the rest? It must be hidden away, buried beneath layers of snow and ice, safe from both rot and scavengers. The burial itself was a ritual of practicality. Hunters dug pits in frozen ground, lined them with leaves or branches, then layered the meat carefully inside. Snow was packed tightly on top, sealing the food like a lid. In colder regions, caves and ice crevices became natural storage spaces, their constant low temperatures acting as freezers. Sometimes the meat was even sunk into frozen rivers or lakes, tethered with stones, kept fresh by the icy water. Every method reflected the same principle: use the land harshness to your advantage. Preserving meat this way carried risks. Hungry predators, wolves, lions, even rival humans, could scent the buried stores and dig them up. To protect their supplies, tribes marked caches with stones, bones, or branches, sometimes posting guards during the night. The meat was life itself, and to lose it was to gamble with starvation. In this sense, food preservation was as much about strategy and defense as it was about storage. It was a secret war against hunger and theft, fought silently in the snow. The contrast between feast and famine was stark. On the night of a great kill, fires burn high, and families gorge on roasted flesh, fat dripping into flames. Children laughed, elders shared stories, and for a moment, the specter of hunger was banished. But everyone knew the truth: abundance was temporary. Within days, the joy of plenty gave way to the discipline of rationing. The buried meat became sacred, carefully unearthed only when needed, divided with precision. Every bite carried the weight of tomorrow, every mouthful balanced against the uncertainty of the next hunt. Anthropologists believe that this habit of preserving food helped shape early human society itself. For the first time, survival was not tied solely to the immediate hunt. Planning became as crucial as hunting. Leaders emerged overseas storage to decide when and how much to retrieve. Sharing became structured, creating rules of distribution that kept the group alive. In the act of burying meat, humans were burying more than food. They were planting the seeds of foresight, cooperation, and social order. The psychological comfort of knowing food was hidden away cannot be overstated. In a world where hunger was constant, the knowledge that sustenance lay beneath the snow gave strength to endure. A hunter trudging through waist-deep drifts could fight longer knowing that, even if the hunt failed, survival was buried nearby. The buried meat was not just nourishment. It was hope, security, and a fragile promise of another sunrise. Other methods of preservation also complemented burial. Meat was sliced thin and hung over fires to smoke, the rising heat driving away moisture and insects. Fat was rendered and stored, acting as both food and protection against the cold when smeared on skin. Fish, when caught, were dried into leathery strips that lasted weeks. But none of these methods matched the sheer scale of snow burial, especially when dealing with massive animals like mammoths. Snow was free, abundant, and merciless against decay. In winter, it became humanity's most reliable ally. The contrast could not have been greater. While predators tore through their kills, devouring every scrap in one desperate feast, humans could save, store, and ration. This difference gave humans an edge over rivals. While wolves grew thin when prey was scarce, humans survived on the meat they had buried months before. It was a subtle but profound shift, one that helped humans outlast many of the Ice Age's fiercest creatures. The practice of food preservation also created ritual. Some groups may have offered prayers or chants as they buried meat, asking the spirits of the animals for permission to keep their flesh safe. In this way, practicality blended with belief. The buried caches were not just food storage. They were sacred gifts, guarded not only from predators, but from the unseen forces that govern life and death. When archaeologists uncover Ice Age sites today, they often find bones scattered in pits, sometimes layered with stones or ash. These may well be the remnants of ancient food caches, proof of the timeless struggle to stretch the bounty of a single hunt into survival across seasons. Each pit tells a story of calculation, of foresight, of human ingenuity battling against nature's cruelty. And so, when we ask why cavemen buried meat under snow, the answer is both simple and profound. They did it because they had to. They did it because hunger was relentless, and the cold could be turned from foe to ally. They did it because in those frozen pits lay the line between survival and extinction. The buried meat was more than food. It was time, extra days, extra weeks, extra chances. It was the difference between children growing or wasting away, between families enduring or collapsing. It was the invisible foundation on which human endurance rested, hidden beneath snowdrifts, waiting to be unearthed. And so, in the endless winter of the Ice Age, where wind tore through the plains and hunger prowled at every door, the snow itself became humanity's storehouse. It was here, beneath the frozen earth, that tomorrow was kept safe. And it was here that humans proved they were not merely creatures of instinct, but beings of foresight, intelligence, and willpower. To bury meat under snow was to bury fear itself, to plant a fragile seed of hope that even in the coldest months, life would go on. When the sun dipped behind the horizon during the Ice Age, survival entered its most perilous phase. Daylight offered at least a chance of movement, of hunting, of seeking food and firewood. But nightfall was merciless. Darkness brought a bitter cold that seemed to seep into the bones, reducing breath to white mist and freezing water into stone. For prehistoric humans, the question was simple yet haunting. How do you sleep when the night itself feels like a predator? The answer lay in the clever balance of fire, shelter, and human closeness. Unlike the great beasts of the Ice Age, humans lacked thick fur or layers of fat to protect them against freezing winds. Naked in that world, they would not last a single night. But humans had something no other creature fully possessed: the ability to shape their environment with thought, tools, and cooperation. Night after night, cavemen turned the element of the world into allies, building a system of survival against the dark. Imagine the scene: a cave mouth glowing faintly against the endless snow. Inside, shadows flicker against stone walls as a fire burns low. Families huddle together on beds of pine branches, animal furs pulled tightly around their shoulders. Children press into their mothers, seeking warmth, while hunters stretch their tired limbs beside the flames. Outside, the wind howls like a living creature, rattling branches and carrying the distant growls of predators. Inside, the tribe has created a fragile pocket of warmth, a bubble of life in the heart of winter's cruelty. Fire was the first and greatest guardian of the night. It did more than warm bodies. It kept predators at bay. The glow of flame signaled to cave lions, wolves, and bears that this space belonged to another force, one not to be challenged. But fire was fickle, needing constant care. As one group slept, others kept watch, feeding logs, bones, or dried dung into flames. A single mistake, a single lapse into slumber, could let the fire die, and with the fire gone, warmth, safety, and life itself would vanish with it. Yet even fire was not enough. Cavemen needed insulation, and so they mastered the art of bedding. Grass, leaves, and pine needles were layered thick on the ground to keep cold from seeping upward. Over these, hides and furs were spread, creating primitive mattresses that insulated far better than bare stone. At night, these furs became blankets, piled high until the entire family vanished beneath them in a single mound of warmth. Sleeping alone in such conditions was dangerous. Body heat was as vital as firelight. The tribe became its own furnace, huddling together in a shared struggle against the cold. Some caves and shelters reveal blackened ceilings where fires burned night after night, filling the space with smoke. Archaeologists believe that cavemen sometimes built small hearths within caves, or used stone circles to contain embers. Smoke may have irritated the eyes and lungs, but it also lingered in the air, thick and insulating, trapping heat in the shelter. In a sense, the smoke itself became a blanket, unpleasant but life-saving. For those who did not have caves, ingenuity was even more critical. Some tribes built huts of branches and animal hides, layering snow itself against the sides. Paradoxically, snow became an insulator, compacted and shaped into walls. It kept out wind and trapped heat from fires. These makeshift shelters, dark and cramped, were far from comfortable, but they were sanctuaries against the killing chill. Inside, hunters, women, and children slept side by side, breathing warmth into the frozen air. Sleep in the Ice Age was not the deep, peaceful rest we know today. It was fractured, uneasy, punctuated by the need to tend fires and listen for threats. A snapping branch outside might signal wolves circling near. The shifting of ice could mean a predator moving past. At least one member of the group always remained half awake, eyes reflecting the flames, ears tuned to every sound. Cavemen did not just sleep through the night. They endured it, inch by inch, hour by hour, until the pale glow of dawn finally returned. And yet, in those long nights, humanity also found something else, connection. Within the glow of the fire, stories were told, myths were born, and knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Elders recounted hunts of the past, described the stars beyond the cave mouth, or warned of dangers that lurked in the dark. Children fell asleep not just to the crackle of fire, but to the rhythm of words, stories woven into the fabric of survival. In this way, the fire became not just warmth and light, but a stage where the human mind learned to dream beyond the cold. Some scientists believe that our circadian rhythms, the way we sleep in cycles of light and darkness, were shaped in part by this ancient struggle. Cavemen likely slept in shorter bursts, never fully surrendering to unconsciousness, always half alert. Dreams, when they came, were tangled with fears of the hunt and shadows of predators, reflections of survival instincts that dominated their waking lives. The night was a time of vulnerability, but also of adaptation, training human bodies to endure on less rest, sharpening the ability to awaken at the faintest sound. It is easy to imagine the fear of lying awake in the Ice Age, hearing the roar of a cave lion echo across the frozen valley, knowing that only a thin wall of fire and hides separated you from its teeth. Yet it is also easy to imagine the comfort turning toward your kin, feeling their warmth, hearing their breathing, and realizing that you were not alone. Nightfall tested every weakness of the human body, but also forged the strength of human community. To survive the coldest nights, cavemen relied on layers: fire, bedding, hides, shelters, and each other. Each layer was fragile on its own, but together they built a barrier strong enough to withstand winter's assault. Every night survived was a victory, a rehearsal for the next. And though the cold was relentless, the human spirit was more relentless still. When we look at soot-stained cave walls today or examine piles of ancient ashes buried in stone hearths, we are glimpsing the echoes of those long nights. Each mark tells us that here, in this place, humans huddled together, whispered each other, and endured until the dawn. The coldest nights of the Ice Age were more than tests of endurance. They were the crucibles in which human resilience was forged. And so, as the firelight flickered and shadows danced across the walls, the cavemen closed their eyes against the darkness. Around them, predators prowled, storms raged, and the cold pressed them like an enemy. But inside their shelters, wrapped in furs, held by the warmth of kin and the glow of fire, they found a way to sleep. And in that fragile, shivering sleep, humanity dreamed itself forward, one night at a time, to the longest winter in history. When night descended on the prehistoric world, the cold was not the only enemy. In the darkness, the land stirred with life. Predators whose senses were sharper, whose bodies were stronger, and whose instincts were honed by millions of years of evolution. For cavemen, winter nights were not merely a battle against frost, but a nightly war with the shadows themselves. Every flicker of firelight meant safety, but just beyond its glow, danger prowled. Wolves roamed in packs across the snow, their eyes glinting like embers in the moonlight. They were not the tame companions we know today, but apex hunters, relentless and cunning. Drawn by the scent of food, of smoke, of warmth itself, they circled human shelters, testing for weakness. Sometimes they scavenged from leftover kills. Other times, they became bold enough to lunge at the edges of camps, forcing cavemen to shout, throw stones, or thrust burning branches into the night to drive them back. A single lapse of vigilance, and a wolf pack could scatter the tribe's food stores or drag off a child into the darkness. Then there were the great cats of the Ice Age, cave lions, larger and stronger than modern lions, moving with silent grace. To these predators, the weak glow of fire was little deterrent. Their hunger was patient, their vision adapted to the dim. Archaeological evidence suggests these lions sometimes shared cave with humans, or perhaps claimed caves before humans dared to enter. Imagine stumbling into such a lair at dusk, only to hear a low growl from the shadows. The cave, meant to be a fortress, could just as easily be a death trap if chosen poorly. And prowling the same frozen valleys were cave bears, massive beasts with brute strength that dwarf human frailty. Unlike wolves or lions, bears did not need packs or stealth. They had sheer power. Though they often hibernated through the harshest winters, those that remained active could rip through shelters or scatter entire groups with a single charge. To a bear, a human was not much more than fragile flesh, unless a human carried fire, spears, and courage born of desperation. The night also belonged to smaller, but no less dangerous creatures. Hyenas, scavengers of the Ice Age, operated with feral boldness, laughing cries echoing the night as they closed in on any weakness. For cavemen, the darkness was never silent. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the crunch of snow, the growl carried by the wind, was a question of survival. Was it just the forest settling, or was it the sound of teeth drawing nearer? This constant threat of predators shaped human behavior. The campfire was not only a source of warmth, but also a weapon, a living shield against the night. Flames kept most animals at bay, but they had to be fed, guarded, and sustained. The glow marked the boundary between life and death. Within it, the tribe clustered close. Beyond it, their enemies lurked unseen. Firelight did not just illuminate the cave walls. It illuminated a fragile line that separated safety from extinction. The fear of predators also changed the way cavemen slept and lived. They rarely rested deeply, instead taking turns to watch the night. Archaeological studies of hearth remains suggest humans often built multiple small fires rather than one large blaze, possibly to extend their reach outward, forming a ring of protection. Spears, stone tools, and clubs were kept close at hand, ready to be seized in an instant. Even children learned quickly that night was not a time for wandering. To step outside the glow of the fire was to risk never returning. But the nightly danger did more than instill fear. It shaped human cooperation. Alone, a caveman stood little chance against a lion or a pack of wolves. Together, with coordinated shouts, weapons, and fire, they could hold their ground. The tribe was not just a family, but a defense system, an alliance of necessity. The very act of surviving predators required teamwork, and this necessity, over countless generations, bound humans closer together. Survival demanded community. And yet, this struggle with predators was not just offensive. Sometimes, humans turned predators into prey. Wolves drawn to the edges of camps might fall into ambushes set by hunters. Hyenas that scavenged too boldly could be driven off and killed. The line between hunter and hunted was thin, constantly shifting, defined by courage, weapons, and luck. Over time, humans learned not only to endure predators, but to study them, track them, and occasionally triumph over them. Even so, the fear of those nights left marks on the human psyche. Some researchers suggest that our instinctive fear of the dark, the unease we feel when light fades, is an inheritance from this era. For countless millennia, darkness truly was dangerous. To fear was not weakness, but wisdom. Myths and rituals may emerge in these long, fearful nights. Stories of spirits in the shadows, of great beasts that lurked just beyond the fire. These tales were not mere imagination. They were warnings, encoded knowledge passed from elder to child. Picture it. Inside a smoke-filled cave, a circle of faces glowing orange in the firelight. A sudden roar from a valley outside silences the group. For a moment, everyone listens. The hunters grip their spears. Mothers clutch their children. The fire crackles as if nervous itself. Then the roar fades, swallowed by the night. Slowly, breath returns, and the elder resumes his tale, a story of ancestors who faced the beasts of the dark, a story meant to remind everyone that vigilance is the price of survival. The threat of predators at night did not vanish with the dawn. But when the sun finally rose, cavemen could step beyond their shelters, scan the snow for tracks, and reclaim a measure of control. The shadows retreated, but memory remained. Each nightfall brought the same struggle anew. Survival was never permanent. It was a nightly test, a ritual of endurance, and a reminder of the fragile balance between humanity and the natural world. Through this battle with predators, cavemen forged habits, technologies, and instincts that shaped the course of human evolution. The sharpened spear, the controlled fire, the communal watch. These were not luxuries, but lifelines born from nightly confrontation. In every successful defense, humanity learned to master fear, to push back against creatures stronger, faster, and more adapted than themselves. And slowly, through countless nights, humans ceased to be the prey and became hunters of a different kind, armed not with claws or fangs, but with intelligence, fire, and unity. Nighttime predators were not just threats. They were teachers, shaping the resilience, cooperation, and vigilance that became hallmarks of humanity. Each roar in the darkness was a reminder of fragility. Each dawn after survival was proof of strength. And so, under the stars of the Ice Age sky, the cavemen lived in constant tension. Every night a question, every morning an answer. If there was one element that stood between humanity and extinction in the Ice Age, it was fire. To modernize, fire is ordinary. A flick of a lighter, the turn of a switch, the glow of a stove. But to prehistoric humans, fire was a miracle, a force of gods, a guardian spirit that turned night into day and death into survival. Every spark was life itself. Every flame a wall against the endless cold and the prowling darkness. Fire was not just warmth. It was protection, power, and identity. It was humanity's eternal guardian. Imagine the first caveman who stumbled upon a wildfire, born from lightning striking a dry forest. At first, it must have been terrifying, a wall of heat and destruction. But gradually, they learned to tame it, to carry smoldering branches back to their shelters, to feed it carefully, to nurture it like a living being. Over generations, fire became part of human existence, as vital as food or water. But unlike food and water, fire could not be gathered. It had to be kept alive, day after day, night after night. For early humans, the flame was a constant companion, fragile yet eternal, demanding care in exchange for protection. In the harshest winters of the Ice Age, fire meant survival against the cold. Without thick fur, without layers of fat, humans would have perished quickly in sub-zero temperatures. But fire transformed caves into sanctuaries, filling them with warmth that seeped into bones, thawed frozen fingers, and gave weary hunters the strength to rest. Around the hearth, families gathered, wrapped in furs, the glow reflecting in their eyes. The firelight turned stone walls into golden canvases, where shadows danced like spirits, where comfort grew from flame and smoke. But fire was more than heat. It was also a weapon, a defense against predators who ruled the night. Wolves and hyenas hesitated at its glow. Even cave lions and bears thought twice before approaching its flicker. A burning branch was a spear of light, a symbol of dominance in a world where humans were otherwise fragile prey. Fire declared to the wilderness, "Here is a creature not to be hunted easily. Here is a force equal to tooth and claw." Archaeological evidence shows that early humans built controlled hearths, some simple circles of stone, others layered pits carefully designed to preserve embers through the night. Ashes discovered in caves across Europe, dating back tens of thousands of years, speak to nights spent tending flames, adding logs, bones, or even dried dung to keep the guardian alive. Sometimes, coals were buried under ash in the morning, carried from place to place, so that fire could be reborn in a new camp. Matches and lighters were millennia away. Without fire-making tools, to lose the flame was to risk death. Fire had to be continuous. In this way, fire became less of a tool and more of a companion, a member of the tribe. With fire, humans expanded their diet. Meat that was once tough and raw became tender when cooked, easier to chew, safer to eat. Bones could be cracked open by flame, releasing marrow rich in fat. Roots, otherwise inedible, softened in boiling water placed in skin pouches heated with hot stones. Fire unlocked new energy from food, fueling brains that grew larger, bodies that became stronger. In a very real sense, fire fed not just the body, but the evolution of humanity itself. The flame also created light, a gift that transformed the human imagination. In the glow of firelight, art was born. Deep inside caves, torches revealed walls where hunters painted animals, hands, and symbols, their red and black pigments flickering in the shadows. Perhaps these were not just decorations, but rituals, ways to call upon the strength of the hunt, to honor the spirits of animals, or to teach children the mysteries of survival. The fire's glow made the invisible visible, both in the world around and in the human mind. But fire was dangerous too. A neglected flame could consume the very shelter it protected. Sparks could leap to hides and furs, turning safety into destruction. Smoke, too, filled lungs and stung eyes, forcing humans to balance fire's gifts with its risks. And yet, even with its dangers, no tribe would abandon it. To live without fire was to step back into the jaws of the Ice Age. Fire also shaped the rhythms of life. Days no longer ended with sunset, with flames burning bright. Humans could stretch their hours into the night, telling stories, repairing tools, tending hides, and sharing the lessons of survival. Around the hearth, elders spoke of hunts and ancestors. Children listened wide-eyed, and myths were woven that gave meaning to the struggle. The fire was not only a guardian, but also a teacher, a circle of light where culture itself was born. The psychological comfort fire provided cannot be overstated. Beyond the physical warmth, it gave humans the courage to face the howling winds and unseen predators outside. To stare into the fire was to feel safe, to believe that as long as the flames burned, the tribe could endure. In the deepest nights of winter, when the cold rattled stones and the dark pressed close, the fire was a heartbeat in the center of the world. Over time, mastery of fire set humans apart from every other creature. It allowed them to migrate into colder regions, to survive winters that no other primate could endure. Fire became a symbol of humanity's power, a sacred inheritance passed from one generation to the next. Some cultures, tens of thousands of years later, would even worship fire as divine, remembering perhaps unconsciously the time when their ancestors' very existence depended on its glow. And so, when we picture cavemen in their winter shelters, it is impossible to imagine them without fire. The flames licking against stone, the crackle of wood, the rising smoke, these are the sounds and sights of survival. The fire was more than a tool, more than a shield. It was the eternal guardian, standing between humanity and extinction. Every ember in those ancient hearths tells a story. Stories of nights where predators prowled and storms howled, but the fire held strong. Stories of hands reaching out to feed it, to protect it, as if it were a child of the tribe. Stories of warmth, of courage, of imagination. In its glow, humans endured. In its light, they dreamed. And as the Ice Age raged on, one truth remained constant. Where there was fire, there was humanity. In the unforgiving chill of the Ice Age, fire alone was not enough to guarantee survival. Flames warmed the body at night, but the moment a hunter stepped beyond the glow of the hearth, the cold descended like an enemy, biting into flesh with merciless precision. Unlike the mammoth, the bison, or the cave bear, humans were born almost naked, their skin thin and fragile against winter winds. Without protection, exposure meant frostbite, hypothermia, or death. To endure, early humans crafted something extraordinary: clothing, not merely adornment, but armor forged from the hides of beasts, tailored by ingenuity into shields against the cold. The story of clothing is the story of adaptation. Archaeologists believe that humans first began wearing animal skins hundreds of thousands of years ago, but in the depths of the Ice Age, this practice became an art of survival. A successful hunt was not just about feeding the tribe. It was also about covering their bodies. Every kill provided food, bones for tools, sinew for thread, and most importantly, hides and furs. To waste these materials was unthinkable. A mammoth's thick skin, stripped and softened, could clothe an entire group. The pelt of a wolf might wrap around a child, while the hide of a deer became leggings, boots, or cloaks. But clothing was not simply draped over shoulders. Cavemen transformed raw hides into garments through skillful preparation. First, the skin had to be scraped clean with stone tools, stretched taut, and softened. Fat and marrow were sometimes rubbed into the hides to keep them pliable, preventing them from stiffening in the cold. Sinew, tough fibers from animal tendons, was twisted into thread, strong enough to stitch pieces together. Awls made from sharpened bone pierced holes through leather, allowing early humans to sew with surprising precision. What emerged was no crude wrapping, but functional clothing tailored for survival. Imagine a hunter preparing for the long march across the snowy tundra. He pulls on leggings made from reindeer hide, fur turned inward for warmth. Around his shoulders, he drapes a heavy cloak of bison skin, tied with sinew cords. On his feet, boots stuffed with dried grasses insulate against the frozen ground. His head is covered with a hood made from wolf fur, ears flopping like trophies of the hunt. He is not simply dressed. He is armored, each layer a barrier between fragile human flesh and the merciless cold. Clothing also allowed humans to push deeper into colder environments than their ancestors had ever ventured. Without furs, there would have been no survival in Siberia, no migration into northern Europe, no endurance in glacial valleys where winds screamed like blades. Furs were, in essence, portable fire, warmth carried on the body day and night. They allowed the tribe to hunt farther, explore longer, and endure storms without retreating to the cave too soon. But clothing was more than practical protection. It carried meaning. To wear the skin of an animal was to carry its strength, its spirit. Hunters wrapped themselves in the hides of predators, perhaps believing they absorbed the courage of wolves or the power of bears. Shamans may have adorned themselves with feathers, claws, or antlers, transforming into half-human, half-animal figures in rituals lit by firelight. Clothing became identity, a way of connecting to the natural world, of symbolizing both dominance over animals and reverence for them. Evidence from ancient bone needles, some dating back nearly 40,000 years, suggests that Ice Age humans were not only making practical clothing, but also stitching with skill and care. These needles, polished smooth, reveal a culture that valued precision. Clothing was not haphazard. It was crafted. Each garment had to endure wind, snow, and movement, sometimes for months at a time. The survival of the group depended on the quality of these furs. A poorly sewn seam could mean frostbite. A torn cloak could mean death. For children, furs were particularly vital. Wrapped tightly in layers, they were carried close to their mothers or nestled in sleeping hides at night. Elders, too, relied on thicker garments, as their bodies were less able to generate heat. The entire cycle of life, from infancy to old age, was preserved beneath the protective armor of animal skins. In this way, every successful hunt was more than nourishment. It was a chance to keep the youngest and oldest alive through the season's harshest trials. We must also imagine the psychological comfort clothing provided. To be clothed was to feel secure, to face the winds without immediate pain. It was a buffer against fear, a symbol of control in a world where humans otherwise stood vulnerable. The act of dressing was itself ritualistic. Hunters suiting up before a trek, families layering hides before braving the snow. It was the ancient equivalent of strapping on armor before battle. Yet clothing was not immune to the elements. Furs grew damp with melting snow, heavy with ice, stiff with frost. Cavemen had to dry and maintain them carefully by the fire, sometimes smoking hides to preserve them. The smell of smoke on fur was more than scent. It was preservation, extending the life of garments, making them resistant to rot and insects. Through such techniques, early humans not only survived but developed traditions of craftsmanship that foreshadowed future textile arts. Clothing also influenced social dynamics. The hunter who brought back the thickest hides gained prestige. Skilled artisans who could stitch garments were valued members of the tribe. Furs could even signal status. The pelt of a rare predator might mark a leader or shaman, distinguishing them from others. Clothing was both survival and symbol, functional and cultural, a practical necessity woven with meaning. When archaeologists uncover remnants of hide-working tools, or when cave paintings depict figures cloaked in animal skins, we glimpse the ancient intimacy between humans and their clothing. These garments were more than layers against the cold. They were the first expressions of technology meeting necessity, of creativity answering nature's challenge. In their furs, humans carried not only warmth but the story of survival stitched into every seam. And so, in the heart of winter, when the winds cut through valleys and frost sealed rivers into stone, cavemen walked wrapped in the strength of the animals they had hunted. Their clothing was not luxury, not decoration, but life itself. With fire at their hearts and furs on their backs, they stood armored against the Ice Age, fragile creatures made formidable by their own ingenuity. The first armor of humanity was not forged in metal, but sewn from hide. And with it, our ancestors defied the winter, step by frozen step, until survival was no longer a question of chance, but a triumph of will and invention. When the first snow blanketed the land, silence descended. The forest grew still, The rivers froze, and herds moved differently across the white horizon. For cavemen, winter was both a curse and an opportunity. Food became scarce, animals grew lean, and the risk of starvation loomed. Yet at the same time, the snow offered new strategies. Every footprint left a trail. Every breath of a beast steamed in the air, and hunters, armed with patience and courage, turned these signs into survival. Hunting in the snow was never an easy task. The cold itself was an enemy, draining strength from the body, numbing fingers, and slowing reflexes. Hunters could not afford mistakes. To venture too far without success meant wasted energy, frostbite, and sometimes death. Yet the tribe depended on these hunts. Without meat, there would be no nourishment. Without hides, no new clothing. Without bones, no tools. Every hunt was a gamble with life, not just for the hunters, but for the entire community. The first advantage winter offered was visibility. In snow-covered landscapes, tracks of reindeer, bison, mammoth, and smaller prey were stark against the white ground. Hunters could follow these trails for miles, learning not only where the animals were, but also how many had passed, how long ago, and in which direction they moved. Snow was a natural map, revealing secrets invisible in warmer months. But this clarity also worked both ways. Just as humans could track animals, predators like wolves could track humans. The snow carried no lies. Strategy was everything. Hunters often worked in groups, positioning themselves across valleys or along frozen rivers. Some would circle wide to drive animals toward waiting spears. Others used cliffs, ice, or natural enclosures to trap their prey. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans may have driven herds into pits or toward ambush points, using the terrain itself as a weapon. In winter, animals were slower, weakened by hunger, and more vulnerable on icy ground. A mammoth might stumble, a deer might slip, and in that brief moment, hunters struck. But the risks were immense. Facing a mammoth in the snow was no small feat. One wrong move, one mistimed thrust of a spear, and the great beast could crush hunters beneath its weight. Bison charged with terrifying speed, their horns goring anyone in their path. Even smaller prey like boar or reindeer could wound a man if cornered, and all of this took place in freezing winds, where hunters' own strength dwindled with every passing hour. Weapons were adapted for the conditions. Spears hardened by fire, tipped with sharpened stone or bone, were the primary tools. Some groups developed spear throwers, devices that gave their projectiles greater force and distance, a critical advantage against large animals. Bows, though rare in the earliest Ice Age, eventually became part of humanity's winter arsenal, allowing hunters to strike from afar. Still, no weapon guaranteed safety. Every strike demanded courage, precision, and teamwork. Snow also made the hunt quieter. Thick layers muffled footsteps, giving hunters the ability to stalk closer without alerting their prey. Camouflage was another subtle strategy. Cloaked in white dusted furs, hunters blended into the frozen landscape. This merging of man with environment was essential, for animals, even weakened by winter, remained alert. One careless movement, one sound carried on the icy wind, and the prey would flee, sometimes for miles, leaving the hunters exhausted and empty-handed. Yet when a hunt succeeded, the rewards were immense. A single mammoth could feed a tribe for weeks, its meat dried and stored, its fat used for lamps, its hide turned into shelter and clothing. Even smaller kills were valuable. A deer meant fresh meat, sinew for sewing, and bones for tools. Nothing went to waste. Winter demanded efficiency. Every scrap of flesh, marrow, and hide was precious. Success on the hunt was not just survival, it was triumph. It meant the difference between hunger gnawing at bellies or children sleeping with warmth and food. Still, the line between triumph and tragedy was thin. Many hunts ended in nothing but exhaustion or worse, casualties. The snow preserved bodies too, not just of animals, but sometimes of hunters who never returned. Stories told by firelight would remind the tribe of those lost, their bravery honored, their mistakes remembered so they would not be repeated. Hunting was not only physical but spiritual, a dialogue between man, beast, and the elements. There were times when hunters turned from large game to smaller, more reliable prey. Rabbits, foxes, and birds provided quick meals, though never enough to sustain the tribe long term. Traps and snares were set in the snow, baited with scraps, catching animals that might otherwise escape. Fishing beneath frozen rivers was another strategy, breaking through ice to spear or net fish, though this carried its own risks of falling into icy waters. Psychologically, hunting in the snow tested human endurance. Hunger gnawed at the mind as much as the body. The endless white landscape, the howling winds, the bitter cold, all of it wore down even the strongest hunters. Yet within this struggle, resilience was forged. Success in such conditions built pride, unity, and trust within the tribe. Each share hunt was a bond. Each shared meal of victory celebrated together. The hunt also shaped culture. Cave paintings, etched in ochre and charcoal, depict mammoths, bison, and deer, not only as food but as symbols of struggle and triumph. These images were more than art. They were records of battles fought in the snow, of beasts defeated, of survival earned. They served as memory, teaching future generations what animals to hunt, how they moved, how they could be brought down. In the frozen silence of winter, the hunt was never just about food. It was about proving human will against nature, claiming dominion over a world that seemed determined to extinguish fragile life. Each spear thrust was defiance. Each kill was a reminder that humans, though small, could outwit and outlast creatures far larger and stronger. And so, in the snow, hunters walked silently, breath steaming, eyes scanning the horizon. They read the tracks, felt the wind, and waited for their moment. Risk hung in the air like frost, but so too did reward. The snow was enemy and ally, a test and a tool. Through it, cavemen carved their survival, step by step, hunt by hunt, until they became masters of the frozen hunt, a species that refused to yield to winter's grip. Not every battle for survival was fought with spears against giant beasts. In fact, some of the most crucial victories came quietly, with careful hands digging through frozen soil or fingers cracking open hard shells. Cavemen knew that meat alone could not always be trusted. The hunt was risky, the outcome uncertain, and animals were not always where the tribe expected them to be. But plants, roots, nuts, and hidden caches of food, these were the silent lifelines of winter, the safety nets that carried families through the leanest months. For much of human prehistory, gathering was as important as hunting, if not more so. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans relied heavily on wild plants, berries, and tubers, many of which provided essential carbohydrates and vitamins that meat could not supply. In summer and autumn, tribes collected these resources in great quantities, preparing for the inevitable hardship of winter. Women, children, and the elderly often took part in this task, their keen knowledge of the landscape guiding them to hidden treasures beneath the earth and among the trees. Roots and tubers were among the most valuable winter foods. Buried beneath frozen ground, they were difficult to extract, but their nutritional value made the effort worthwhile. Species like cattail roots, wild carrots, and other starchy tubers could be dug up and roasted over fire, providing warmth and energy. Some required careful preparation to remove bitterness or toxins, knowledge passed down through generations. To the untrained, they might appear useless or even dangerous, but to those with ancestral wisdom, they were survival's secret allies. Nuts, too, played a vital role. Hard-shelled and long-lasting, they were nature's ready-made storage. Acorns, hazelnuts, and chestnuts, gathered in the warmer seasons, were dried and stored in animal skin pouches or buried underground to keep them safe from moisture and pests. Cracking these nuts by firelight, sharing them among hungry children, was more than nourishment. It was a reminder that foresight and patience paid off. Each nut cracked open was proof that survival was not only about courage in a hunt, but about wisdom and preparation. Berries and fruits, though more fragile, were not forgotten. Some could be dried in the sun or smoked over low fires, transforming into leathery strips that lasted months. Others, like cranberries, could be preserved naturally in cold bogs or under snow, where the freezing temperatures acted as nature's refrigerator. These small bursts of sweetness were rare treasures in winter, boosting morale and providing much-needed nutrients that prevented illnesses such as scurvy. The techniques of preservation were as ingenious as they were varied. Cavemen learned to use snow and ice as storage, burying meat and plants beneath packed layers, keeping them safe from decay. They hung strips of meat and herbs above smoldering fires, allowing smoke to dry and preserve them for weeks. Pits lined with stones or animal hides created makeshift cellars, keeping food cool, dry, and hidden from scavengers. Every method was born of necessity, refined by trial and error, and passed on as essential knowledge. Winter also forced creativity. When stores ran low, tribes turned to the land with desperate determination. The bark of certain trees could be stripped and boiled into edible paste. Lichens and mosses, though bitter, provided sustenance in dire times. Pine needles, rich in vitamin C, were steeped into tea to fight sickness. These were not feasts, but survival meals, proof of human adaptability in the face of scarcity. Psychologically, gathering was different from hunting. It did not demand the sudden rush of danger, the split-second timing of a spear thrust. Instead, it demanded patience, memory, and deep knowledge of the land. Gathering was often communal, strengthening bonds among women and children who carried baskets and shared knowledge of which plants healed and which harmed. Around the fire, these same gatherers prepared meals, turning raw resources into nourishment that warmed bodies and spirits alike. The act of storing food carried a sense of security, almost spiritual in nature. To have reserves buried under snow or hidden in caves was to push back against the terror of winter. Each cache represented foresight, planning, and triumph over uncertainty. It allowed families to sleep at night with the knowledge that tomorrow, no matter how cold or barren, would not bring immediate hunger. Food stores were more than supplies. They were hope embodied. Yet, as with hunting, risks were ever present. Hidden caches could be stolen by animals, wolves, bears, or smaller scavengers like foxes and rodents. A poorly sealed container might allow moisture to seep in, spoiling the contents. An early thaw could rot stores hidden beneath the snow, leaving families unprepared for the long months still ahead. Miscalculations in how much to gather or preserve could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Competition was not only with animals, but with neighboring groups as well. The need for food sometimes led tribes to raid each other's stores, sparking conflict in already harsh conditions. In this sense, food was both sustenance and power. To control supplies was to control survival. To lose them was to risk death. In the broader story of humanity, these acts of gathering and preserving were the quiet foundation of civilization. Long before fields were sown and crops domesticated, people learned the importance of preparation, of storing for the future. This foresight, the ability to think beyond the present hunger, was a defining trait of humankind. It separated survival from extinction, and it laid the groundwork for the agricultural revolutions that would one day transform the world. Culturally, the knowledge of edible plants and preservation methods became part of oral tradition. Around fires, elders taught the young how to recognize leaves, how to test roots, how to crack nuts without wasting the precious inside. Songs and stories wove lessons into memory, ensuring no one forgot which berries healed and which poisoned, which roots sustained and which killed. These were not trivial details. They were survival etched into story. In winter stillness, when a hunt failed or the winds kept hunters at bay, the tribe turned to these stores. A handful of dried berries, a pot of boiled roots, a pouch of nuts. These simple meals carried families through nights of famine, and though humble compared to the feasts of mammoth or bison, they were no less vital. For in the endless battle against winter's grip, it was often the quiet gatherers, not just the daring hunters, who ensured humanity's survival. Gathering and preserving food was not dramatic. It was not painted on cave walls in grand hunts or retold in tales of danger. Yet it was the invisible backbone of survival, the reason humanity endured when other creatures perished. The wisdom of foresight, the patience of preparation, and the art of preservation were as heroic as any hunt. They turned winter from certain death into a challenge that could be faced and overcome. In the frozen silence of winter, when the wind howled through valleys and snow buried the land, one force stood between life and death: fire. To us today, fire is commonplace, something summoned with the flick of a match. But for prehistoric humans, fire was both miracle and mastery, a fragile gift that demanded respect, protection, and constant vigilance. In the depths of the Ice Age, fire was warmth against the frost, light against the darkness, safety against predators, and a tool that transformed raw survival into human culture. The first spark of fire must have seemed like magic. Lightning strikes that set dry grass ablaze, volcanic eruptions spilling flames across the land, or the accidental friction of wood. These were humanity's first encounters with the element. But discovering fire was only the beginning. The true revolution came when humans learned to control it, to feed it, to keep it alive even through the coldest nights. Archaeological sites show blackened hearths, circles of stone that once held flames burning bright thousands of years ago, silent evidence of this mastery. In winter, fire was more than comfort. It was survival itself. Without it, hypothermia claimed lives within hours. With it, cavemen could endure the longest nights, wrapped in fur, gathered around glowing embers. The fire's warmth kept frostbite at bay, dried wet hides and clothing, and gave weary hunters the strength to face another day in the snow. Fire turned shelters of stone or wood into sanctuaries, pushing back the endless cold. Cooking was another transformation born of flame. Raw meat, once chewed tough and risky with disease, became tender and safer to eat when placed over fire. Roots and tubers, bitter or toxic when raw, became edible through roasting. Fire unlocked calories hidden within plants and animals, fueling the human brain, which grew larger over millennia. Around hearth, food was shared, and sharing itself became ritual, a bond that tied groups together. In many ways, fire was the first table, the first dining hall, the first place where stories and meals mingled into culture. But fire was also fragile. A single gust of wind, a careless hand, or a night of heavy snow could extinguish it, plunging the tribe back into deadly cold. Cavemen learned to guard their embers like treasure, carrying them in hollow bones, animal horns, or wrapped in dried moss. Fire was rarely made fresh. It was preserved, passed from one camp to another like a sacred inheritance. To lose the flame was to lose life. The art of creating fire, though primitive by our standards, was a profound breakthrough. Friction methods, like rubbing sticks or striking flint against pyrite, slowly gave humans the power to ignite flame at will. Sparks caught in tender bundles of dry grass, bark, or fungi were coaxed into life with breath and patience. This process was slow, painstaking, and never guaranteed, but the moment a flame appeared, it was cherished as if the gods themselves had descended. Fire-making was not simply practical. It was a ritual, a moment of awe. Beyond warmth and food, fire became a shield. Predators feared the flicker of flames, the crackling of wood, the sudden light in the dark. Wolves circled but did not dare cross the glowing barrier. Lions, bears, and other beasts kept their distance. For cavemen, this was not just security. It was dominion. Fire turned fragile humans into masters of the night, claiming space that would otherwise belong to stronger, faster creatures. The psychological power of fire cannot be overstated. In endless darkness, fire was light. In despair, it was hope. Its glow drew people together, fostering community. Around the flames, songs were sung, stories were told, and wisdom was passed down. Shadows danced on cave walls, inspiring the first sparks of imagination, the earliest art and myth. The fire was not only a tool of survival, but also a cradle of human culture, the stage upon which humanity first dreamed. Yet fire had its dangers. Left unchecked, it could consume shelters, forests, or even the hunters themselves. A spark in the wrong place could destroy an entire camp. Children were taught respect for fire early, for one careless mistake could spell disaster. Fire was a friend, but never fully tamed. It demanded reverence, discipline, and constant awareness. In the depths of winter, when storms howled and food was scarce, fire became a symbol of endurance. The hearth was the heart of the tribe, always burning, always watched. People rotated through the night to feed it, ensuring that the flame never died. The simple act of placing a log onto embers became ritual, a quiet promise to the group. We will see another dawn. The fire also became central to preservation. Meat could be smoked, dried over low flames, or boiled in primitive vessels. This extended its life, ensuring that food did not spoil when hunting was uncertain. Smoke itself became useful, repelling insects, curing hides, and scenting the air with memory. Every fire carried with it the history of meals cooked, stories told, and nights survived. From an anthropological perspective, fire was a defining line between human and animal. No other creature on Earth mastered it. And in doing so, humanity gained an evolutionary advantage unlike any other. Fire allowed migration into colder climates. It fueled population growth, and it gave birth to culture itself. Without fire, humans would have remained bound to warmer lands, limited in diet and vulnerable to predators. With fire, they became conquerors of the cold. In the poetic rhythm of life and death, fire stood as a counterpoint to frost. Winter brought silence, hunger, and fear. Fire brought warmth, food, and hope. The two forces clashed endlessly, season after season, with humanity caught between them. Each hearth was a victory, each flame a declaration. Winter may surround us, but it will not claim us. And so, in the long frozen nights, cavemen sat huddled around their fires, breath mingling with smoke, eyes fixed on the glow. The flames whispered stories of survival. Shadows danced with memory, and sparks rose like prayers into the darkness. In those moments, fire was more than heat, more than light. It was life itself, fragile, fleeting, yet fiercely defended. When we look back across the gulf of millennia, it is easy to imagine the caveman as a figure trapped in a world long vanished, a life of stone tools, icy winds, and endless struggle against hunger. But the truth is more profound. Their survival in winters of unimaginable severity is not just a story of the past. It is a legacy that still lives within us. Every modern fireplace, every winter jacket, every moment we gather around food and warmth and safety carries echoes of those who first faced the ice age and refused to yield. The lessons of prehistoric winter survival are as relevant today as they were tens of thousands of years ago. At the heart of those lessons lies adaptability. Cavemen thrived not because they were the strongest beasts on the tundra, but because they could change. When the great cold came, they sought new shelters. When food was scarce, they preserved and stored. When predators stalked them, they turned to fire and teamwork. Humanity's true weapon was not the spear, but the mind, the ability to think beyond the present moment, to imagine a future, and to prepare for it. This foresight became the foundation of civilization. The same instinct that led tribes to bury meat under snow, or to crack open nuts by firelight is the instinct that would one day create granaries, agriculture, and cities. Our ancestors' struggle with scarcity taught us the value of planning, the necessity of cooperation, and the importance of sharing resources. Without those winter lessons, human society, as we know it, would never have taken shape. There is also a spiritual dimension to this legacy. Fire was not merely warmth, it was meaning. Every flame that survived the storm was a symbol of resilience. Every successful hunt, a reminder of humanity's fragile triumph over the vast indifference of nature. Around those fires, people told stories of ancestors, of animals, of gods and spirits. These stories carried lessons, comfort, and identity. In that way, the hardships of winter did not only test bodies, they nurtured culture, myth, and imagination. The long nights of cold may have been the birthplace of storytelling itself. Modern humans, wrapped in heated homes, rarely face the same mortal threats from winter. Yet the echoes remain. Our festivals of light in the dark months, from the fires of Yule to the candles of Hanukkah, from Christmas hearths to New Year's celebrations, are all rooted in the ancient struggle to defy darkness and keep hope alive. These traditions are cultural memories, passed down across generations, reminding us that even in the coldest times, warmth can be created, shared, and celebrated. But the legacy of survival is not only cultural, it is also biological. Our bodies still carry the marks of Ice Age adaptation, the way our metabolism shifts in colder weather, the fat reserves our bodies store, the endurance of human muscles. All of these are shaped by ancient winters. Even our psychology, our tendency to huddle together in times of crisis, reflects instincts honed by those who once sat shoulder to shoulder in caves, conserving heat and courage. There is also a cautionary lesson. Survival in winter was never guaranteed. Entire groups vanished when they miscalculated food stores, when fires went out, or when hunts failed. Nature showed no mercy. That stark truth reminds us today that survival is always conditional, dependent on respect for the environment and wise use of resources. Our ancestors learned balance, taking what was needed but ensuring the land could provide again. Forgetting that balance today, in an age of climate change and environmental stress, risks repeating ancient mistakes on a far larger scale. The legacy of winter survival also lies in unity. The Ice Age forced humans to depend on one another. A lone hunter in the snow rarely lasted long. Survival demanded cooperation. Food was shared, fire was tended communally, and knowledge was passed between generations. These bonds of kinship and community became the foundation of social structures that still define humanity. The family hearth evolved into village, the village into the city into civilization. What began as survival around firelight grew into the bonds that hold societies together today. And yet, perhaps the greatest lesson of all is resilience. Winter tested humans with relentless cruelty, freezing winds, starving bellies, predators in the dark. And every time humanity found a way, we dug deeper, thought smarter, worked together, and endured. That resilience, forged in snow and ice, still shapes us. It is why, even in times of crisis, humans search for solutions. It is why we endure hardship with hope, why we believe that tomorrow can be better than today. When we see images of cavemen in furs, crouched around a fire, we are not looking at strangers from a lost world. We are looking at ourselves. Their story is not distant, but woven into our bones, our cultures, and our instincts. They faced winters that could have erased them. Yet here we are, their descendants, living proof of their perseverance. So the next time we light a fire, cook a meal, or share warmth with others on a cold night, we might pause to remember. We are continuing a tradition that stretches back tens of thousands of years, a tradition born of survival, resilience, and hope. The legacy of cavemen's winter survival is not a tale of the past, but a reminder of what it means to be human, to adapt, to endure, to dream, and to carry the flame forward into the future.